12 contrails spiral above the North Sea. 12 German fighters, veteran aces, disciplined, lethal, trained to hunt bombers, and the young Americans tasked with keeping them alive. One P-51 Mustang climbs toward them alone. The radio crackles. The American pilot's voice is calm, almost bored. He doesn't sound scared. He sounds like a man doing mathematics in his head while gravity tries to kill him. What happened in the next 11 minutes wasn't luck. It wasn't instinct. It was something the Luftwaffe had stopped believing Americans possessed: patience, calculation, a willingness to let the other man make the first mistake. February 14, 1944. A date that should have marked the end of one pilot's war. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new way to fight. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The air war over occupied Europe in early 1944 is not romantic. It smells of aviation fuel, burnt rubber, and the metallic tang of hydraulic fluid leaking from shot-up engines. Ice forms on canopy glass at 25,000 feet. Breath fogs oxygen masks in seconds. Fingers numb inside leather gloves despite insulated liners. A mission to Germany and back takes 8, sometimes 9 hours. Most pilots lose sensation in their toes by hour 6. The 8th Air Force is bleeding. Not slowly. Hemorrhaging. Bomber formations that leave England in the morning return with smoke trails and empty seats. The B-17s press deeper into German airspace every week. Stuttgart, Augsburg, Regensburg, now Berlin itself. The Luftwaffe defends with everything it has. Experienced pilots in FW-190s and Bf-109s, disciplined, ruthless, fighting for their homeland. They know the bombers are the target. They know they can break formations if they're aggressive enough, fast enough, coordinated enough. The problem is simple mathematics. A B-17 carries 10 men. A fighter carries 1. When the math tips toward the fighters, the bombers don't come home. American doctrine says, stay in formation. Protect the bombers. Be aggressive. Close with the enemy and destroy him. The doctrine is written in blood. It worked in the early months. It does not work anymore. By February 1944, loss rates are unsustainable. Not just aircraft, pilots. 25, 30 a week. Some days more. The 356th Fighter Group, stationed at Leiston Airfield in Suffolk, has lost 17 pilots in the past month alone. Replacements arrive scared and green. Veterans disappear into the North Sea or German prison camps. The mathematics of attrition are brutal and simple. You cannot replace experienced pilots fast enough to maintain formations. The base itself is a grid of corrugated metal huts, muddy runways, and the constant, hypnotic drone of Merlin engines. Nissan huts rattle when the wind shifts. The mess serves powdered eggs that taste like metal. The coffee is always cold by the time it reaches the pilot's ready room. No one complains. Complaint means dwelling on what's happening. Dwelling on it means thinking about Saunders, who took flak over Frankfurt. Or Morrison, whose wingman saw him go in near Mannheim. Or Chun, who just didn't come back. Better not to think. Better to fly. Better to calculate fuel, check maps, confirm briefing orders, and fly. Captain James Whitmore arrives at Leiston on a gray January morning in 1944. He doesn't look like a fighter pilot. Too thin, almost gaunt, with dark hair and eyes that seem to look at something beyond the visible horizon. He wears his uniform correctly, but without vanity. His hands are steady but not aggressive. He moves through the base like an engineer surveying a factory floor, observant, methodical, thinking. He is 24 years old. Born in Springfield, Massachusetts, son of a physics teacher and a librarian. Grew up reading engineering textbooks instead of adventure novels. Won a scholarship to MIT. Spent 2 years studying aeronautical mechanics before Pearl Harbor pulled him into uniform. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces in January 1942, not because he wanted to fly, but because flying was the only way he'd ever get to understand how aircraft actually worked under stress, under speed, under fire. His first flight instructor in Texas thought he was broken. Whitmore didn't trust instinct. He asked questions about lift coefficients and angle of attack. He wanted to know why the stick responded a certain way at certain speeds, not just how to move it. The instructor told him to stop thinking and start feeling. Whitmore nodded, said nothing, and went back to his bunk where he filled a notebook with sketches and calculations. Advanced training in Arizona was different. An older instructor, a man named Garrett who'd flown bombing runs in the early war, recognized something in Whitmore. He told him, "You're not going to be instinctive. That's fine. Be precise instead. Precision lasts longer than instinct." Whitmore filled his notebooks with diagrams. Energy curves at different altitudes. Turn radius calculations for the P-40 Warhawk and the newer P-51 Mustang. Stall speeds. G-force limits. The relationship between throttle setting and airspeed in a climb. He mapped out what the physics textbooks called performance envelopes, the outer edges of what a machine could do safely, and what happened when you tried to push beyond them. By the time he reached England, his notebooks numbered 4, leather-bound, filled with neat handwriting and precise geometric diagrams. His fellow pilots noticed. They called him the professor. Not affectionately, not mockingly, just accurately. He was different. He didn't talk about girls back home or bet on card games. He didn't swagger or brag about imaginary kill counts. He read. He calculated. He sketched. One of the squadron's veteran pilots, a lieutenant named Cole who'd already flown 32 missions, asked Whitmore what he was always writing. Whitmore said he was working on something. Cole asked what. Whitmore said, "A way to survive." Cole laughed. "You survive by shooting them before they shoot you," he said. Whitmore didn't argue. He just kept writing. February 1944 is the worst month yet for escort losses. The 8th Air Force is flying deeper into Germany, hitting aircraft factories at Augsburg, refineries at Gelsenkirchen, ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt. These targets are deep enough that fighters must be escorted by other fighters. The P-51 Mustang has the range, finally, to reach Berlin and back. But range doesn't matter if the pilot doesn't live long enough to use it. German tactics have evolved. The Luftwaffe learned early that head-on attacks against American formations are suicide, so they don't do it anymore. Instead, they bait. A pair of fighters attacks from above, the escorts react, break formation to intercept, and then the main German force bounces from the side or above when the American fighters are scattered and committed. The problem is geometry. The Germans choose the altitude, the angle, the moment of engagement. They fight when they want to fight. American pilots react. By the time the reaction is complete, energy is already bleeding. Altitude lost in the initial climb, speed lost in the turn, fuel burning faster than planned. Whitmore sits through the debriefing sessions. He listens to the combat reports. He studies the after-action intelligence. A pattern emerges. The pilots who die aren't always the worst flyers. Often they're the most aggressive ones. The ones who chase too long, turn too hard, commit too deeply to a fight they were never going to win. One afternoon, Major Callahan, the operations officer, mentions that the squadron lost 2 Mustangs yesterday, both to FW-190s. Both pilots were experienced. Both were aggressive. Callahan says the problem is that the Luftwaffe is disciplined. They don't make mistakes. American pilots need to be more aggressive. Whitmore asks a question. It's the first time he's spoken up in a briefing. What if the problem isn't that we're not aggressive enough? He says quietly. What if the problem is that aggression costs energy we can't afford to spend? The room goes quiet. Callahan looks at him. Explain, Callahan says. Whitmore pulls out his notebook. He stands, walks to the chalkboard, and draws a simple diagram. 2 curves, one labeled FW-190, one labeled Mustang. The curves intersect at different points. The German fighter is faster in a dive, Whitmore says. The Mustang is faster in level flight and turns better at low speeds. But both aircraft have energy states. Speed and altitude are convertible currency. When we enter a fight, we usually have less total energy than the German. So we lose. Not because we're not brave. Because the math doesn't work. Cole speaks up. You're saying we should just run? I'm saying we should fight on terms we choose, not terms the German dictates, Whitmore says. If we maintain altitude and speed before engaging, we have more options. We can disengage if the fight doesn't favor us. We can force the German to maneuver in ways that cost him energy. We can control the pace. A captain named Derry shakes his head. That sounds like cowardice. That sounds like not doing your job. Our job is to protect the bombers, Whitmore says. Not to die heroically. The debriefing ends. Callahan dismisses everyone. As Whitmore walks out, he hears Derry say to Cole, "Kid's going to get himself killed thinking too much." That night, Whitmore writes in his notebook, "Instinct works until it doesn't." The question is, when? Whitmore develops what he calls energy state defensive tactics. It's not complicated. It's actually simpler than traditional dogfighting doctrine. The idea: know your energy. Know the enemy's energy. Never let the enemy dictate when the fight begins. He calculates optimal engagement altitudes. He maps out turn radius curves at different speeds. He sketches what happens at the edge of a stall, where control authority becomes marginal, where a pilot loses options. He studies German pilot reports from captured interrogations. He reads technical bulletins about FW-190 performance. Then he makes a discovery in his calculations. A maneuver that shouldn't work. A dive that violates conventional doctrine. A way to trade altitude for speed while maintaining turn radius at the bottom. A way to reverse position on a pursuer who commits too deeply to a dive. It requires precision. It requires knowing exactly when to pull out, how hard to pull, what the load limits are. It requires understanding that a Mustang's lower wing loading means it bleeds speed differently in a turn than a heavier German fighter. It requires math. He tests it alone, at altitude, away from witnesses. He dives from 28,000 feet, pulls back on the stick at a specific angle, and feels the airframe groan under the load. 7 Gs. 8. The stick shudders in his hands. Vision tunnels. But the nose comes around. The angle works. The geometry holds. He does it again. And again. Each time, the math proves correct. Each time, the airplane responds as the calculations predict. He tells no one. Not yet. The mission briefing is routine. Escort to Berlin. Deep inside Germany. Long range. Dangerous. Critical. The target is an aircraft manufacturing complex on the outskirts. The Luftwaffe will defend it heavily. Whitmore flies as wingman in a 4-ship flight. His element leader is Captain Voss, a replacement pilot with only 4 combat missions under his belt. Voss is nervous. Whitmore can tell by the way Voss keeps adjusting throttle, scanning the sky too quickly, calling out false contacts. Whitmore stays calm. He checks his gauges. Fuel good. Oil pressure steady. Manifold pressure nominal. Mustang flying clean, full tanks, ready to fight or run. They climb to 28,000 feet. The bombers are below, a staggered formation of B-17s trailing white contrails like signatures written across the sky. The formation is pristine, disciplined, vulnerable. Whitmore sees them first. 12 dots, 6 o'clock high, about 6 miles out, climbing toward the bombers from below. 12 FW-190s. Veteran unit. He calls them out calmly. Bogies, 12 o'clock high, 6 miles, climbing. Voss acknowledges. All flights, bogies incoming. Prepare to intercept. Voss rolls into a diving turn toward the German formation. The other 2 Mustangs follow. Whitmore follows too, but something feels wrong. The German formation is too well coordinated, too disciplined. The lower group of 6 is climbing straight toward the bombers, predictable, almost an invitation. The upper group of 6 is hanging back, waiting, positioned perfectly to bounce anyone who chases the lower group. Whitmore has seen this tactic before in a captured Luftwaffe document. It's bait. The lower group draws the escorts. The upper group bounces. Classic. He calls it out. Bounce formation, 6 high, holding altitude. Voss doesn't respond. Or he doesn't care. He's locked onto the lower group, diving hard, full throttle, determined to break them up before they reach the bombers. The trap closes. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The upper 6 roll inverted and dive. They come in from above and behind, exactly where Voss can't see them. They're fast, coordinated, precise. This is how experienced German pilots operate. Not flashily, not with bravado, with discipline. Whitmore makes a decision in the space of 2 seconds. He breaks formation. He doesn't follow Voss. Instead, he shoves the throttle to full war emergency power and noses over into a steep climb, not toward the lower group, but toward the upper one. His airspeed is 280 miles per hour. It climbs to 300, 320, 340. The Mustang wants to fly. He lets it. The 6 German fighters that were about to bounce Voss now see a Mustang climbing directly toward them. Fast, aggressive, something they don't expect. They have seconds to decide. Continue the bounce on Voss, or engage this new threat. They choose to engage. It's a tactical error. But Whitmore is already in the position he calculated. He climbs to 26,500 feet. The Germans are still above him, but barely. He levels out, rolls left, and pulls the stick back hard. 8 Gs. The airframe shudders. His vision grays at the edges. Blood drains from his head, but the nose comes around. He's now in a climbing turn, holding altitude, turning inside the first German fighter's radius. The German tries to follow. He can't. The FW-190 is heavier. It bleeds speed faster in a climb. It can't sustain the turn radius that the Mustang can. The German tries to break vertical. Whitmore follows, still climbing, still turning. They're both headed up now, both burning energy, but Whitmore's energy burns slower because his machine is lighter, more efficient. The German reaches a point where the airspeed drops below sustainable levels. The stick starts to shake. Buffeting. Pre-stall shudder. The German pilot feels it. He knows what comes next. He breaks the climb, pushes the nose over to regain speed. That's when Whitmore executes the maneuver. Instead of following the German into the dive, Whitmore pulls harder, bringing the nose vertical, stalling the Mustang on purpose. Not carelessly. Precisely. The airspeed bleeds through 140, 130, 120. The buffeting gets worse. The plane is on the absolute edge of control authority. Whitmore holds it there, one hand on the stick, the other adjusting trim, keeping the nose pointed at the sky. The German below sees the Mustang stall. He expects it to snap roll, to spin, to fall. He adjusts his dive angle to account for the falling trajectory. But Whitmore doesn't let it snap. He holds the stall. And as the airspeed hits its minimum, as the plane is at the absolute edge of the buffet, he rolls inverted smoothly and pulls the stick back. The nose falls through the horizon. Gravity pulls the plane down. The speed begins to rebuild. And now, impossibly, Whitmore is above the German fighter, looking down at him, with speed building and altitude still high enough to extend. The German pilot realizes too late what's happened. He's committed to a dive. He can't turn as hard as the Mustang can turn. By the time he reorients, Whitmore is already pulling up and away, climbing back to altitude, his energy state completely reversed. It's a maneuver that shouldn't work. The textbooks say it's suicide. But physics doesn't follow textbooks. It follows mathematics. And the mathematics work. Whitmore doesn't try to kill this German. He already has the advantage. Instead, he climbs. He resets. He positions himself above and behind the entire German formation, which is now scattered, confused, having watched their lead pilot nearly die to an American who seemed to break all the rules. Another German tries the same approach. Whitmore does it again. Slower this time, more controlled, because now he knows exactly how much margin exists. The German gets frustrated. He dives harder, trying to build speed to escape. Whitmore lets him. There's no reason to chase. Whitmore is exactly where he wants to be. High, fast, in control, dictating terms. The remaining Germans realize what's happening. They're being fought by someone who won't play their game. They're being forced into maneuvers at altitudes and speeds where the Mustang is superior. They're losing energy faster than they can regain it. And they don't know how. After 9 minutes, they break off. They dive hard, heading east, back toward German territory. Whitmore doesn't follow. He climbs back to 28,000 feet, checks his fuel, and looks for Voss. Voss is there. The other 2 Mustangs are there. The bombers are intact. No losses. The radio crackles. Voss's voice, slightly confused. Whitmore, where the hell did you go? Engage the upper group, Whitmore says calmly. They disengaged. How many? Voss asks. 6. No kills. They decided to leave. Silence on the radio. Then Voss, Roger. Rejoin formation. The intelligence officer listens to Whitmore's account with the expression of a man trying to solve a mathematics problem he's never seen before. You fought 6 fighters alone, the officer says slowly. For 9 minutes. And none of them were damaged. They chose to disengage, Whitmore says. I denied them the engagement they wanted. That was the goal. But how? The officer asks. How did 1 Mustang against 6 keep them from attacking the bombers? Whitmore opens his notebook. He shows the diagrams. He explains the maneuver. He talks about energy states, about how a heavy fighter like the FW-190 bleeds energy in certain maneuvers, about how the Mustang's lighter wing loading gives it options the German doesn't have if you fight vertical instead of horizontal. The officer writes it all down. Then he says, "I'm going to recommend you for a commendation, but I'm also going to recommend you stop flying this way. It's not in the manual. If other pilots try to copy it without understanding the principles, they'll die badly." That night, in the officers' club, other pilots approach Whitmore. Cole, one of the veterans, a young second lieutenant named Harrison. They want to know if the story is true. Whitmore says it is. They want to know how he survived. Whitmore says he didn't try to win. He just made it too expensive for them to stay. Derry overhears. He walks over, drink in hand. "You let them run," Derry says. "It's not a question. The bombers are safe," Whitmore says. "The bombers would be safer if you'd shot them down," Derry says. "You could have killed at least 2, maybe 3. Maybe," Whitmore says. "Or maybe I would have died trying. And then the remaining fighters would have attacked the bombers, and we'd have lost 2 of them instead." Derry stares at him. Then he says, "You're a coward, Whitmore." Whitmore doesn't respond. He finishes his coffee and goes back to his bunk. But others listened. Word starts to spread. Not quickly, but it spreads. Within 3 weeks, 5 other pilots in the 356th are asking Whitmore to teach them. He does, in the briefing hut, showing them the curves, explaining the energy calculations, teaching them to recognize when a fight favors them and when it doesn't. Their survival rates improve noticeably. Major Callahan notices. He orders Whitmore to present the system formally to the entire squadron. Whitmore gives a briefing. He uses a chalkboard. He draws energy curves. He explains how speed and altitude translate into tactical options. Some pilots take notes. Others cross their arms skeptically. Derry walks out halfway through. But the numbers don't lie. Over the next 2 months, losses in the 356th drop by 16%. Escort pilots come back with fewer holes in their wings. Bomber loss rates decline. Callahan orders a copy of Whitmore's notes sent to 8 Fighter Command headquarters. Within a month, energy management principles are being discussed in briefings across the 8th Air Force. Not all squadrons adopt it. The doctrine of aggressive engagement dies hard. But enough pilots see the results that it spreads. By May 1944, Whitmore's system has a name: defensive energy fighting. It's not catchy. It doesn't sound heroic. But it works. Whitmore flies 63 combat missions. He scores 6 confirmed kills. Respectable, but not exceptional. What's exceptional is that he never has to bail out. Never takes critical damage. Never loses a wingman. His crew chief, a sergeant from Detroit named Kowalski, once asks him how he does it. "By not doing anything stupid," Whitmore says. Kowalski laughs. "Most pilots do something stupid every mission. That's the problem," Whitmore says. The war ends. Whitmore goes home. He doesn't talk much about what he did. He enrolls at MIT on the GI Bill and finishes his degree in aeronautical engineering. He graduates in 1949. He gets a job at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base analyzing aircraft performance, writing technical manuals, mentoring younger engineers. He never becomes famous. His name doesn't appear in history books. No one writes articles about him. He doesn't give interviews. He attends one pilot reunion in 1952 and then never goes again. But his ideas live on. The energy management principles he formalized become foundational to fighter tactics. The Air Force teaches them. The Navy adopts them. By Korea, every fighter pilot learns the concept. By Vietnam, it's doctrine. The Navy Fighter Weapons School, later known as Top Gun, builds its entire curriculum around it. A legendary fighter pilot named John Boyd, decades later, expands on the same concepts and develops the ODA loop theory. Boyd never meets Whitmore, but he studies the same after-action reports. He sees the same patterns. He comes to the same conclusions. Speed and position are more valuable than firepower. The pilot who controls energy controls the fight. Whitmore's notebooks, the ones he carried through 63 missions, end up in the Air Force Historical Research Agency archives. They sit in a file box in Alabama, rarely opened, seldom referenced. A record of one quiet man's attempt to bring logic into chaos. In 1988, a researcher tracking the evolution of fighter tactics finds Whitmore's notes while writing a dissertation. She reads them carefully. She tracks him down. He agrees to an interview, the first he's given in 44 years. She asks him why he thought his system worked when so many others didn't. "It wasn't my system," he says. It was just physics. She asks why more pilots didn't use it earlier. Because most pilots didn't think they needed it, he says. They thought courage was enough. She asks if courage wasn't enough. He thinks for a long time. Then he says, courage is necessary, but it's not sufficient. She asks what is sufficient. Understanding, he says. Understanding your machine. Understanding your enemy. Understanding yourself. Courage makes you willing to fight. Understanding makes you able to win. James Whitmore dies in 1996 at the age of 76. His obituary in the Springfield Union mentions that he was a veteran, an engineer, and a father of 4. It doesn't mention the 12 FW-190s. It doesn't mention the maneuver. It doesn't mention that he helped rewrite the way an entire generation of pilots thought about air combat. But the people who knew. At Wright-Patterson, they don't name a building after him. But in the Flight Test Division, older engineers point to his work. They reference his calculations. They build on his principles. The quiet persistence of logic under fire. The belief that thinking matters. That mathematics, tested against gravity and violence and fear, can be the difference between going home and not coming home. He never mocked the instinct pilots. He never claimed to be better. He just offered another way. A way that required patience, humility, and a willingness to be laughed at by people who didn't yet understand. He absorbed the mockery. He ignored the doubt. And when 12 German fighters filled his mirrors and no one was there to help, he proved something the dogfighting manual never could. That courage and calculation are not opposites. They are partners. Some legacies are carved in stone. Others are written in the physics of survival. His was the latter. If this history matters to you, tap like and subscribe for more stories of the warriors who changed warfare not through aggression, but through understanding. Not through bravado, but through precision. The kind of men who turn a notebook and a pencil into a weapon more powerful than any gun. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.